Robert and Mark, welcome. If you guys would like to get started.
Great, Judy. Thank you
Sure.
very much. Thanks for having us. Robert, I was just going to warn you, you're on mute. Um, hey, I just sent, also joining us today, Alicia Hopkins, who keeps us all going in the right direction over there at the MLS, not only with the associations and the brokerage events as well. Michelle Ronco's here. If you later on, if you've got, what's that average median sale price in Santa Clara County? She knows that answer, that kind of stuff. And then David Scalora, and David, we've done 3 of these presentations this morning already, I think, and we noted at the start of each one that you used to report to Robert Bustamante over there in the compliance department
Before he was hijacked. He went in a trade with some undisclosed amount.
Right.
Some draft
choices
picks,
to be delivered later.
yeah.
So Dave's gonna help us out as well, because he and I have been doing presentations, but Robert, this is all about the NAR settlement. And
Right.
that on June 19th, our board, the MLS listings board, sort of set down the guidelines and set down the rule revisions that needed to be seen, all to be put into place on the evening of August 12th, which is a Monday. So on Tuesday, August 13th, let's talk about the changes that the subscribers are going to see.
Well, those are all my slides. So
That's
thanks
it?
everybody. Yeah.
Our work is short.
All right. Let me share my screen to see if I can get the presenter view thing going. Please counsel me if you don't see it.
That's perfect. Looks good. Looks great.
All right, first time. All right. Hi everybody. I'm Robert Bustamante, MLS Listings, and as Mark said, we are implementing the NAR settlement requirements as an NAR sanctioned MLS. It's not clicking forward, so let me just use this. Okay, there we go.
There.
So what is NAR settlement? I know you guys have all heard it all ad nauseum, but I think the red font here is the greater takeaway, is that it resolves the claims, and that NAR has settled a number of lawsuits, collective lawsuits, which really protects almost every realtor member and the AOR associations, the realtor associations, as well as the association owned MLSs, to which we are a type. Our Santa Clara is one of the shareholder members of the corporation, and so MLS Listings is covered if we opt in, and we did opt in. And the last bullet point at the bottom there, you'll see it's a URL for facts.realtor. That's really a good place to go to get the background, the detail, the current status, things that led up to, and the NAR position, as well as the industry position across the board. So there's a lot of really good information there that you can check yourself and get some real deep background.
Robert, it's important to note, I think, although this may resolve the lawsuits, the DOJ is not going away on August 13th. They're going to continue to monitor, and that's why that is a huge consideration that the board has placed on on us, of being very risk averse.
Right. You'll see in this timeline, like right now here, I'm highlighting the deadline for MLSs to implement on August 17th. But out here in the future, in November 26th, is where they will actually, the judiciary will is scheduled for a final approval, which may or may not happen. And so, there are some things dangling still. And so what we're doing is we're taking a pretty conservative approach, because, the sand might be shifting under our feet.
Right.
We want to make sure that we're on very solid footing going forward, which is an excellent metaphor that I'm going to use going forward.
Write that one down. Sand under the feet.
Sand under the feet. Yeah, right. So here's the timeline. Everybody's seen it, and this is where we're at.
Okay.
As Mark said, the 17th, the deadline, but we're going to be implementing our changes on the 12th. So here we have the effective date of August 12th, and we have opted into the settlement. And that's to give our teams a little bit of lead time, because there are some software changes, and we want to make sure the software changes don't upset any other part of the apple cart, and everything's still working and so forth. And so we've adopted the MLS rules. We have it up on our pro support community, and we will share the link down in the slides here. And so everything, when you wake up on August 13th, the Brave New World will be there, and all the MLS rules will be in effect. And that's when any violation of the settlement requirements will become a MLS penalty. And like most of our enforcement, if for whatever, I know Steve Bianchi's here, he's one of our friends, he's a friend of the MLS. I'm going to pick on him because why not?
Not too hard. I like Steve.
Yeah.
And Debbie's pretty cool too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. If he were to violate the rules, we would contact him and go, hey Steve, we removed this language that you've this violation that you put in, and here's the rule, don't do it anymore. If he does it again, there'll be a hefty fine that will assert on him, and ultimately, if he does it once more, board is determined that we would suspend the violator. If they come back from suspension and they just cannot control themselves, haven't learned a lesson, the likelihood is they will be expelled from the system. So it's a
Gotcha.
very serious matter, because that type of thing puts everybody at risk. And like Mark was saying, there are sharks still circling the survivors on the island, right? They're just waiting for somebody to fail, and then they just get this automatic lawsuit going with an automatic settlement, and they drag the company or the enterprise through the courts, and it's a huge drain on resources. And some little MLSs have actually dissolved because they just couldn't handle any of the financials. So we don't want to put our enterprise in that position. So the board of directors taking a very serious approach, as well as your own AORs and your own brokerages, right? It's just better practice not to do it. So the settlement requirements under the requirements under the NAR settlement for MLSs is a specific list of must-dos, and we've done them all. We've already adopted the rules which hit these bullet points. So one is primarily remove the mandatory offer requirement for participation, where brokers had to make and accept offers of cooperative compensation in order to participate in MLSs. That's removed. That's a rule change. It's just a strikeout. We've also had to prohibit all the participants, subscribers, sellers, anybody to make an offer of compensation in the MLS through our system. So we are going to change the listing input form. It won't have any fields for the offers of compensation. Just go to the next field. We've removed the unilateral offer per listing rule, and we've added the prohibition, which it says not only to remove it, but we're required to enforce that you can't do it. And we're going to be looking for any type of language which would be close to offer of compensation or mentioning the word commission. And any communication for offers of compensation in MLS would be a violation. That would include a disclosure packets that have your offer as one of the pages in there. We would probably get a report. We're going to check some of them. So the thing is not to do it. Just don't use the MLS in any way to convey any offers of compensation.
So Robert, just maybe for some of our newer viewers, newer folks to the industry, commission versus compensation. Can you just give us a quick, clarifier for each of those?
Sure. So there's actually 3 C's being bandied about and being used interchangeably.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, is a commission, cooperation, compensation, and concessions, right? And those are all essentially people are using the same, but they're very different. A listing broker will earn their commission with their client seller.
Okay.
Right? The seller hires somebody to do it. It's almost like like a painting or a sculpture. They get commissioned to do this. Yeah.
So that's the money going from the seller to the listing broker.
Right. And then on the MLS, previously the brokers would be required to make an offer of compensation of some type, including zero recently, to cooperating brokers, and that's the compensation.
Okay, and so that's the money going from the listing broker to the buyer broker.
Yeah, and that's an interesting distinction because in California it's broker to broker, right? In some states, and I think that's one of the troublesome points. is that they would require the seller to pay the compensation to the buyer's agent. And so
Gotcha.
our space is a little different here on the coast. And so we had a little bit of insulation with respect to broker to broker. And that's why, the storm is kind of moving west. It started over there in the Midwest and it went to the east and it's coming west, but we were pretty insulated. But the point being, that is not completely true. And they're are not completely, what's the word? You're not completely exempt. And so we had to opt in, and we put these requirements in place. So the offers of compensation, also known as commission, can no longer be displayed, and
Okay.
we will remove all historical display of compensation, right? Because the whole idea of fee setting and that type of thing, if we left them in very easily to make a case that, well, look, you guys didn't learn your lesson. There you are. You're still in the Sunny Trust position. So I'm going to go ahead and sue everybody. And I'm going to drag your brokerage in, and I'm going to drag you in and the MLS in. So it's completely removed as of August 12th. Wake up on August 13th. There won't be any in there. Interesting point. Mark asked the other day, what happens if I have a transaction that's happening from have an accepted offer on the 12th and everything goes away on the 13th? The answer would be, while the rule was still in effect on the 12th or any time prior, that offer was made and accepted. It's enforceable under arbitration under the then rules. We would just recommend everybody print out your listing, your agent report, so that you have it documented, so that that's probably not going to happen, but just CYA and just document it. But it would be arbitrable because the rule was in effect when the offer was accepted.
Right.
Okay,
And-
moving
and-
on.
Well, and we're not gonna, we can't give advice that, well, what do I tell my seller at this time? That's more of a question for your broker or your office manager, correct?
That's correct. All of the forms and all the documents we'll get into a little bit later are really not. It's between the parties,
Right.
right? And we're definitely not going to provide guidance or counsel on that.
Gotcha.
Additionally, as part of the requirement is that the data feeds, or excuse me, we cannot support any non-MLS mechanism. And for example, there's these commission share or compensation sharing websites popping up where they want to aggregate multiple brokers' offers. We just cannot participate in that in any way. If, for example, Realtor.com, which they already said they're not going to, but if they were to display multiple brokers' compensation, we would have to turn off their feed. We would just not allow that to happen with MLS listings data. And brokers and agents, while they can put their own offers of compensation on their own listings on their own websites, if for whatever reason they would put somebody else's, that would be a violation. We would turn them off also. So the thing to do is not aggregate any other brokers' offers of compensation being displayed to the public on your website, although you could do yours if you so chose. So Mark Co could have his up there, but he couldn't also include Rob Co on those.
Gotcha.
This is kind of a weird space for MLSs to be in with respect to enforcing buyer agreements. But under the settlement, the MLS is going to enforce the requirement that cooperating brokers use a buyer agreement when they go prior to going to show homes. And so our plan is to treat this under our normal documentation rules and our normal documentation process. If for whatever reason, Carl Lee, and I'm picking on Carl, if he were to go to a home and somebody challenged him and said, hey, do you have a buyer broker agreement? And he doesn't have one, he'll report it to us. I'll contact Carl and go, hey, Carl, please give us a copy or submit a copy of your buyer broker agreement. And he will. And then that case will be closed. If he doesn't, we'll say, Carl, you have to do it. Don't do it anymore. And if he continues to do it, we'll levy a fine like we do under our normal process. The point is that it's not nearly as egregious as trying to offer compensation in the system. So it's going to be just our normal current process. And so every CAR does a pretty good job of explaining the forms. Everybody know they have new forms out. I haven't really seen them. I've been away from the office for a little bit, but they've done a pretty good job with their forms, and there's a lot of scenarios, and so we recommend that you talk to your broker about those scenarios, what forms you want to be using as a best practice, because you'll have it's not a requirement that the MLS enforce a buyer broker agreement that creates agency. It's just a buyer agreement, and those can be very shallow or very general. Um, Prior to showing a home, there'll be certain elements that would be necessary. But then you have like open houses where you have non-agency forms, and you have the agent showing the open house wasn't part of the listing brokerage. So there's a lot of scenarios, a lot of what if, and that type of thing. We won't be able to answer them. We recommend that you talk to your broker directly, or get some help from CR Legal or NAR, Facts.Realtor, that type of thing, because there's all these niche and scenario based questions. Generally speaking, MLSs will enforce the buyer agreement.
And Robert, we've always relied on our subscribers to sort of be our eyes and ears out there, right? We don't have every listing agreement sent to us, so we know you've got a listing, but things are found out, and the compliance department gets a phone call on that kind of stuff. But this is just like showing instructions or clear cooperation rules. I mean, we've got a lot of things that the subscriber base keeps an eye out for us.
Yeah, so we do count on everybody to help keep our community policed, in as much as we cannot possibly be at all the open houses that are happening, and nor do we want to. And we operate on what's called presumed authority, like you're saying with listing agreements. We're saying that we're professional enough to know what the rules are, know what the legal requirements are, and that you're going to execute those. However, from time to time, somebody might not know or may not do it. And it'll help quite a bit if we have all 17, 18,000 people aware and helping. And that's why we have that education first, so that when Carl calls in about Steve, he knows that we're gonna.
Steve again. Steve.
Well, now Carl and Steve are colluding, conspiring.
Oh boy, those guys.
That's the worst, right? So yeah. So it'll be a report, and we do that with showing. There's certain things that we can't just know, but I can tell you we put in new tools to help us detect on the MLS when there's a violation. We're going to be looking in showing instructions, like you point out, HOA fees. We're going to be looking at all the free text fields to see if anybody's really trying to get cute. And we highly recommend that you do not try to work around this. It's just not a very good thing to do. And no one wants to be the poster person for the MLS rules enforcement, because from the board of directors down, they're pretty serious about this.
Gotcha.
Is there anything else? Yes, data feeds are modified. They're not going to include any compensation information. So our IDX, because pre-filtered, and a lot of people don't know this, but MLS listings IDX feeds, when you guys sign up for that Home Find or Property Mind or whatever, our IDX feeds come pre-filtered. So you're never really going to have violations being sent to your websites, including this. It'll come pre-filtered. There just won't be any compensation in there. So you can just run your websites pretty safely, that we will not put you in harm's way if you're taking an IDX feed. If you're taking a full broker data feed and you're doing your own work through a data consultant, then yes, you have to set your own filters. You have to mind the store, so to speak. But if you need any help, we have a whole team ready to help you. Just contact data@mlslistings.com, and our IT team will help you out with whatever your question is. And again, you can have offers of compensation on the MLS. Excuse me, you can't have it on the MLS, but you can have them on your website, but you can't have no other brokers. And this is an important takeaway too, Mark, for everybody, is that you still can have broker to broker offers of cooperation all day long. You just can't do it through the MLS.
Right.
Carl Lee picks up the phone, sends an email, fax, text, whatever to Steve and said, hey, went to Elm Street. I'm thinking of buying it. Is your seller offering any compensation? Yankee says yes. Deal. Let's go. Deal done. Right. The only difference is that it's not unilateral binding through the MLS. So you have to make sure that it's codified in the offer and everybody agrees, right? So that's a change in the step, is that it's not a binding offer. You have to pay attention to the offer. You have to agree in writing, but if it's off the MLS, then you're good to go. So that practice is still in place. And I had somebody say, he goes, "Oh, what do you mean? I mean, I'm gonna have to contact the listing agent." I go, yes, you're gonna have to contact pick up the phone, send the text, email, do something, and they'll respond, right? And so you can listing agents, you can have little packets set up, flyers, emails, anything you want to do, send in response. You just can't do it through the system. That's our requirement.
And don't link them through the system.
And
Don't put
don't
them on the
right, and don't link them
system.
to the
Yeah,
system.
just
Right. Yeah,
we're not, the MLS is not for that anymore. We have other responsibilities.
yeah, and they're looking, and so just that don't do it to our system. So concessions this is the big buzz term, concessions. Mark and I had a conversation earlier, and concessions are I consider them a normal part of everybody's daily business. Has been since I've been in the MLS. There's been give and take and yin and yang and all this sort of thing. So you can still do that. We're not adding. They've always been allowed. We're just not adding any new fields. And part of the reason why is because if we were to add, seller will consider, concessions, and you check the box, what does that even do? What does that even mean, right? You're not really, it's not helping. It actually creates more questions than anything. So if you want to put those kind of language in your private remarks, you can. But you're still going to pick up the phone and say, what's the deal here? So we're just not doing it. And it's also a little worrisome because, we talked about the 3 Cs. People are, what we don't want to do as an industry, and especially as an MLS, is simply move compensation over into the concession area, right? To where somebody of a reasonable intelligence can say, oh, look at them. They are still doing the same thing. They haven't learned their lesson. Let's get them again and increase the penalty and the settlement amount. And instead of 418 million, let's get it to the billions of dollars. And so that's not really something that anybody wants to do. So we're just not adding any new fields. And in fact, go ahead.
Well, I think it's important to note on that topic of they're still looking. It affects everyone. Everyone is going to get called out. The agent, the broker, the MLS, right there. Everyone's involved. Everyone is connected, and that's why the community has to, sort of get itself policed and learn some new ways. Learn the 3 Cs. Don't just try and hide one under another, right? Don't just give it a new title. And then that relates sort of back to that you talked about putting concessions in the remarks. The word specific has sort of, that bell rang today. It's got to be a specific reference to that concession allocation, correct?
Well, you can't direct the concessions, obviously, to be used in compensation in any manner.
Right.
And not to put too fine a point on it, prior to all of this, the MLS had passed a rule allowing specific seller to buyer incentives to be in our public remarks. And that was to help sellers communicate to buyers, hey, I'm willing to offer credit points
Right.
buy down. Yeah.
Buy downs, right.
Yeah. So incentivize them to purchase my home. And so we have that. So now under this new light, you still have concessions, and we're not going to advise on what language to put or how to use it and that type of thing. We'll be looking for violations only, and where it is going to be violating the principles and the intent and spirit and the facts of the settlement.
Okay.
And in fact, we're removing the closing credits concession fields, which we had for a long time. And it's primarily because nobody was using them. And our council had said that, if people started putting at closing that this is what we did to incentivize these buyers, then now you could somebody could say you're reestablishing compensation standards.
Right.
And that's not a good place to be with respect to this antitrust type accusation that NAR is trying to settle. So let's not do that. let's just, keep it between the parties, which everybody's been doing anyway, because over the 20 years or 15 years that we've had it, less than 3% of all listings have actually
Right.
been used that field.
Right.
All
Okay.
right. So we're monitoring the market needs, meaning that, in fact, like you said earlier in our conversation to this show, is that many things are happening. Sometime, there are countersuits being waged. And so MLS Listings are looking at all the channels and all the activities related to the settlement, and will adapt as necessary. Dave had said, if the market evolves one way or the other, it's an evolving scenario. If the market evolves one way or the other, we'll move along with it, right? And as the timeline shows, we'll know more toward the end of the year whether or not the DOJ is going to take any action or create any additional comments. And then the November final approval, which will kind of lock things down a little bit more. So what we're doing, we're coming out August 12th with what we think is going to be a best practice. I think it's pretty solid. We're communicating this to everybody. We're removing, trying to make it as bulletproof as possible so that you can't trip over it. You would have to intentionally go in and trip over it and create some kind of problem. It won't be because you clicked the wrong box or you didn't know, or that kind of thing. It has to be an affirmative action on your part to create a violation under the settlement. So that's kind of good. And ours, everything will go into effect August 12th, then August 13th, as I said before, the Brave New World comes. And Mark knows more than I, that we're not standing still, right? First, let me talk about these resources. You have the resources, Facts.Realtor, CAR has a bunch of resources. We have our own support resources. SCORE has their own. I didn't put it on this particular slide. And so there's lots of places you can go to get more information with your own brokers, get help. But we're not standing still. We're going to move forward. We're going to charge forward into the new millennium with our marketplace stuff. We have, what do we have, Mark? We have the new Pro dashboard that's migrating very soon. A couple of new product releases. And again, I always forget, what's that one called?
Cubicasa.
Cubicasa does the
floor plans.
Floor plans, yes. And then we have an ad builder. So we're going to keep driving forward and moving on. We're not going to sit, oh, woe is me. We're gonna drive into the minute to create a new value packed marketplace for everybody. And I think if you haven't used the new dashboard with the new cards and stuff, you're going to love them. It'll have Michelle's data on there. You can have market trends, all these really neat zippy things. So that's how we're going to finish the year strong.
Yep, absolutely. So Jody, I do want to give a shout out to the SCORE litigation update pages on the SCORE.com website. Also is very complete with information there.
All right, so we're gonna start Q&A. There were a lot of questions in the chat box. So I'm gonna start with those. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. Please keep yourself muted until you are called upon. Make sure you have a name and your name is an iPhone if I call on you. And I've copied all the links that Alicia's been putting in. So when you get the recording, I will also have all of these links for you. I think you answered this, but just reiterating, what happens to a listing created before August 12th that hasn't closed? Do they need to get it updated with mention of, and we're going to say chicken wings.
Okay.
Not the
yeah. So if you have a listing that's in an active status, there's nothing to do. Even if you have it in a contingent or pending status, there's nothing to do. Though pending and contingent listings, there's expectation that they will follow through the listing life cycle. If it's an active listing, the offer compensation that you have in there will simply be removed. If you have remarks language for whatever reason, that will also be removed. And you'll go into the settlement requirements very clean.
I'm going to jump around a little bit because you just answered, I think, one of them. Can you indicate in the private MLS remarks, seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions without indicating any amount or what it would be used for?
Yes, you can.
Okay. so I think the answer is no, but you can or cannot display compensation on the agency website.
On the agency website.
I think you can put it on your own agency website. However, you cannot put that agency website anywhere on MLS.
Right. If you are, so we had this question right here. If you are, if agency website means brokerage website, brokerages are able to put their offer of compensation on their listings only. You can't link to that through the MLS on the listing. There might be a roster position, which will have your website URL, which we consider is not linking through the MLS because that's a specific roster. It's a different use. So the point is, don't add it to the MLS if that's what you're going to do.
If using the CAR MLSA form, if we have a listing that is not going to be active or marketed publicly for a period of time, can we submit the MLSA to MLS listings, or do we need the SELM?
So I'm only familiar with the SELM, which will exclude the listing. If you have an agreement that's not going to be effective in the future, is that what the MSLA is? Is it an agreement that's effective in the future? Anybody?
One of the Carls.
Carl,
Yeah,
Steve,
Carl.
Dennis Steinbeck.
This
Dennis,
community in action right here. All right.
I'll go. The MLSA is the multiple listing service addendum, and in there it does have for the seller to indicate if they are going to be advertising the property immediately to the public, or if they are going to begin marketing it at a later time.
So exclusion, the exclusion from the MLS. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the purpose of that is because we still are operating under NAR's clear cooperation rule. So if you have a signed listing agreement, you have a couple things to do. You have to either put it on the MLS within 3 days of signing that, or if the seller prohibits you to put it on the MLS, which the MLA might be doing that, then you must submit the SELM or assigned exclusion to the MLS in lieu of the listing. And that satisfies that component where you have a listing agreement and you're not putting it on the MLS. However, if you advertise it publicly at any time subsequent to that, then the NAR clear cooperation rule is triggered and you'll have 1 business day to add it to the system. So those 2 elements have not changed. They might have added this MLA form for marketing direction and codifying. I'm doing what my seller is asking me to do. But with respect to your listing agreement requirement to list or exclude and clear cooperation, those rules are not affected by the settlement. Not yet, anyway.
Okay. This might be a general question. I don't necessarily think it's for you guys, but is the buyer broker agreement a must, or is it the buyer's agent's choice?
Well, the only thing I can add would be from our perspective for enforcement, we're not enforcing that you must have a buyer broker agreement that creates agency, right? We're just saying you have to have a buyer agreement. What does that mean? It's either intentionally vague or accidentally vague, but it just means my understanding is that you and your client you now have a client who's signing to you saying, I am hiring Carl to do these things for me for free or for $100 or whatever those are. They have agreement, a client agreement in some way. And I'm going to show him 5 homes, or I'm going to show him 6 homes, or whatever those cases are. That's the only thing we're going to enforce. Whether it's a buyer broker agreement that has compensation in there, fees and things like that. That's another animal.
I also put a link to the SCORE litigation page, which has a lot of information from CAR and NAR about what forms are about to be required. I highly recommend you guys also check that out in addition to the MLS changes. Carly, do you have something to add on that or a question?
On the buyer broker agreement question. So if you are a member of a realtor-owned MLS like MLS Listings, under the settlement, we are required to have a buyer broker agreement or buyer representation agreement. As Robert said, there are different ways you can have that agreement in terms of what work you're going to do for that buyer. You could put limits there, or the buyers could put limits there. But we are required to have that agreement before we can show a property. That's the first thing. Second thing, I think in the chat, there was also a question about can the buyer not sign? So the buyer has a choice. If they decide they don't want to sign any kind of agreement, that is an unrepresented buyer. So from an agent standpoint, you have to consider kind of the risk management aspect of that. And there are forms from CAR to address those issues, including a new advisory that tells that buyer, we don't represent you, we represent the seller. This, of course, only comes up if you're a listing agent. And then the other thing is there is legislation working through the state that would make a legal requirement for all licensees to have a buyer representation agreement when they are working with buyers. So it's not by law now, and if that passes, it applies to all licensees, not just realtors.
Are they going to, I have a question. Are they going to define the elements for the buyer representation agreement? Term, consideration, I mean, are
Yeah,
those
so if you're talking about timeframes, what we will do in that, what we are agreeing to do in terms of providing services, I believe the forms, I don't have them from me because CR is releasing those forms, I believe, this week.
Okay.
But my understanding is that, yes, all of those details are defined and it covers a lot of scenarios. So take as many classes and Zooms like this as you can.
Okay.
Clarification on the question that came in about seller putting concessions. Someone emailed MLS last week asking, can you put sellers willing to consider offers asking for concessions? And this person was told no. And they have a case number. So could that be the difference between putting it in the private remarks and just putting it in the remarks? Is there a difference of where you put it?
No, not really. Well, sort of yes, sort of no. What I think they hit is depending on who they spoke to, our person may have, again, they said concessions and they heard commission or compensation and they said no. So give me that case number. Let me educate our people. We are going through the same learning curve that our community is. And so from time to time, we might err, but we'll make those corrections.
Thank you. And Alicia, I just sent you the case number. I think we answered it. No. Okay. Does this apply to mobile homes? Because I've seen many people post signs, but not in MLS for quite some times.
It's a residential, but not commercial, so requirements.
But is a mobile home considered?
Yes.
Yeah, in our system,
Okay.
it's a residential property class.
Okay. Can we link to disclosures.io and have a PDF in there with instructions?
What kind of instructions?
I don't know, but if the
Presuming it's compensation instructions, the answer would be no.
Okay. Let's see. Can we offer compensation to the buyer's agent, including the percent given to the selling office on private remarks?
No,
No.
I think the key word there is commission and not
no.
compensation.
Commission or compensation is no.
Okay.
And workarounds are no. So here's an example. We're in conversation in CMLS, the Council of Multiple Listing Services. they were talking about agents having a photo of the kitchen table. And if there's 3 apples in the bowl, then that's an offer of 3%. If there's 2 in an apple core, then you, right? Okay. And then you have in the living room, if you see what is it, the stuffed animal with the doll and the baby, that's 2.5%, right? So, let's not do any of those because Mark's going to have to look at every photo and decide. And so let's not do any of that. But it's funny now, but why would you do that? Just pick up the phone, talk to the guy, send him an email, right?
And I think that's the key point, Robert. And I've heard it in meeting after meeting from the veteran agents who are instructing and mentoring, saying, "Look, just pick up the phone. This is the way we ran our business for decades. You picked up the phone, and
Yeah.
and that's going forward. What's old is new again."
Yeah, Steve, Dennis, and Carl are nodding, and that's because they came out of the modems where it was real exciting for them to hear you've got mail, and that was a big breakthrough for them, right? No offense, everybody. I mean,
That's
we're
an old
family.
timer.
Yeah.
The commercial business has always been like that, calling an agent to ask for
Yes.
permission. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
That's the biggest game that's played on that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I see you, Carl. We're going to drag you into this too, Carl San Miguel. So,
And I'm just gonna clarify because I think this is correct. You can put a concession. You can use that word, but you can't use commission and compensation.
if it is indeed a concession, yes, you can, right? So we're going to have to use some latitude and judgment that looks like you are offering compensation because of the way it's structured. It's going to be hard to do, but yeah, we have that today, and we did that intentionally in November because the sellers wanted to offer something to buyers because there's this mortgage scenario, right? And they wanted to make their properties attractive to buyers by offering these certain things. So we have I looked in the MLS prior to all of this, and we have things like seller isn't going to finish the bathroom remodel, so offering X thousand in concession to buyer. That happens all the time, right? And sometimes they leave the piano because I don't want to move it, and that they do these kind of things. So those are all concessions. So that's not new. What's new is trying to replicate compensation via concessions, and that is kind of what the troublesome part is for everyone, is that they just want to shift it. And so, if I may, CMLS was very visible with their what they're going to do with respect to buttons and bows and click marks and things and concessions and so forth. But I read recently in an Inman 2-part article where Ed Zorn was kind of saying, okay, you know what, pick up the phone, call the person. He said the way it's going seems to be better for everyone, right? And so I'm not saying that they're backing away from that, but everybody is taking kind of a more conservative approach. They're not saying, let's replace compensation with concessions.
Does a notation of seller willing to consider offers asking for concessions need to be only in the private remarks, or can it be included in public remarks?
Well, so that's the thing. We would probably not remove it from public remarks. I think what we want to do as a community is determine, is that language cooperative to the cooperating broker? Should the cooperating broker be introducing that to their client and counsel them as to what's best for them transaction wise and property wise? That's what would go in the private remarks. If we determine over time that that's cooperative or uncooperative, whatever the case is, we'll make a determination. But generally speaking, the whole idea was we wanted specific seller to buyer incentives. That's what we used. That's the language we used when we changed the rule in November, so that they could throw a dart at exactly what the seller was offering to any buyer this specific thing as opposed to a shotgun blast that said, you know, what does that even mean? That they're willing to the only thing it could mean, well, not the only thing it could mean, but it's we think it might be evolving to is they're trying to indicate in the MLS that the seller will pay compensation. And if we perpetuate that, then how have we changed or met the requirements by not using the MLS to convey that? And so that's why it takes everyone to say, listen, we have to stop because those sharks are literally, well, not literally, there is literal danger by doing that, by not stopping and not changing the behavior, because that's the expectation. I think the expectation is that they will not, as an organized community, they will not do that. They're going to try to find a way to work around it and perpetuate the practice, and thereby just enriching the pocketbooks of all these lawyers because they just can't stop. And so the thing to do is stop using the MLS for this type of activity, step outside and continue the activity off the MLS because that's fully negotiable. There's no mandatory offer. There's no set fees. None of that's going to be available any longer that anybody can claim antitrust or make any assertions of impropriety, because those are going to happen between the parties. And that's just the way, you know, that's the way America works, is that it should be that way. And you shouldn't have a leveraged or a predetermined conduit that does those types of things, which the MLS was being accused of.
So we know we can't say the word compensation, but can you say, for example, in private marks, that you're offering 2.5% concession?
No.
Didn't think so. Nope. No numbers.
No numbers. No offer. No offering. That would be, we would determine that to be a violation.
And I know you talked about, I'm going to ask this question. I know you talked about, violations, and that your first one is a, hey, you need to fix this. Your second one is a fine. Have you guys determined how much yet?
We did. Well, so sort of yes and sort of no. So there's an amount that's going to the board of directors in August. And frankly, it's a little, in my opinion, it's a little lower than what it came out of the rules committee. And the rules committee, you know, they're very generous people and they're practitioners also. And they thought that Steve or Carl or Dennis or Carl, San Miguel, they made a mistake, right? They obviously made a mistake. And so why ruin them or whatever, you know, why beat them with head? So it more than likely it'd be somewhere between, I mean, I don't want to hazard a guess, but I would say somewhere between $500 and $1,000 or more, right? It would be enough to really feel the pain and not want to do it again.
Well, I think you can charge up to 15,000.
Yeah. So if we
I
have
like
Carl
that.
has his way, it'll be
Yeah.
So and thanks for bringing it up, Carl. And in the other violations, we do have an escalating process that says you do it once, twice, it doubles until it reaches the NAR limit of 15,000, right? In this particular case, it's not going to even get to that point with you still being a member of the system. And so if you insist on violating this particular rule, you will likely become somebody else's headache.
And the other question I have is, because I think I heard this, is MLS is doing this because they're part of the settlement.
Yes.
So what is, if you can kind of explain, what are the potential fallout if you've got hundreds of agents just violating left and right? What is the fallout and the repercussion to MLS itself?
It'll probably bankrupt us under lawsuits. The burden will be so heavy that we wouldn't be able to sustain the enterprise and we'd have to fold.
Yeah. I think that's why it's also important. You know, you're not only protecting yourself as agents, but you're helping to protect your MLS by not saying if you have 2 guinea pigs and a rabbit, then you're going to offer, you know, X amount of dollars. I think it's important to understand that, because I'm not sure if everybody always understands that this isn't just because you guys are responding to something, it's because you're part of the lawsuit and also have to now follow new rules.
Yeah, you know, our partners to the north, in fact, I'm glad you brought that up. Our partners to the north, Berries, was embroiled in a lawsuit. They were dragged into it. And I think even SFAR, Steve, might have had that kind of problem, right? And Metrolist and Berries are broker owned, and they opted in also. And so they want to not face the lawsuit scenarios if they do these things, right? If they do these things, we can't be sued for these allegations. And we're all pretty much marching in step. I believe, Mark, isn't that what's happening? August 12th, all the
Yes.
NorCals, yeah.
Yeah, all the what are called the Alliance, what's called the Alliance. That's the MLSs around the greater metropolitan Bay Area. We're all moving at the same time. So that our data will stay synced as well.
I don't think this is one of those things to play the game of, well, that won't happen to me. That sometimes people like to try. Carl Lee?
Yeah, I was just going to add to your question, Jody and Robert's answer, and I will defer if Robert has a different understanding. My understanding is under the settlement agreement, MLSs could be audited for compliance to the settlement agreement.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So Dave Wetzel is making sure that we have a producible, what's the word, documentary evidence of our efforts to comply, of our steps to comply. So upon any challenge, we can produce and not produce material that would be in any way antitrust. So we do take that audit as a real threat, so to speak, to the enterprise. Some grandstanding, you know, person wants to come in, because there's this group, I forget the name of them, they're consumer action people or something, that were looking at the CAR forms and we're saying that it was not enough. So they're coming out of the woodwork, so to speak. I never heard of those guys. It's not the and so, you know, so yes, good point. We could be audited, and we're preparing for we're trying to insulate ourselves or bulletproof our process for that type of audit.
Carl Samagal, and then a couple Zoom questions, and then I see a couple more hands raised. So Carl, then Zoom, then back to hands.
Yeah, so in the old days, we used to call it non-recurring closing costs. Concessions are kind of new to me. Non-recurring closing costs are costs that happen one time at the close of escrow. If you were to sign your client up for a buyer broker agreement and had a percentage or whatever in there of compensation, you become a non-recurring closing cost. So how would the MLS handle that?
I think I heard that before too, and you don't want to become party to the escrow, and so that would be something the brokerages would want to counsel, not so much the MLS. That's just the form. I think that you're exactly right. You become part of the transaction, and it'll affect everything if that happens.
All right.
All right, we're gonna bounce to Zoom, and then Steve and Debbie, then Kelly. So this is back to the concession. So you're saying agents may use the words seller concession in remarks, but can't use the word. There we go. But can't use the word compensation. However, the MLSA in 5A says seller concession may include, among other things, buyer broker compensation.
Well, I'm sure that's true. You just can't publish it in the MLS.
Okay. If you have a follow-up question to that, you can raise your hand or put something in chat. Steve and Debbie?
Thank you. Robert, I got beat up so bad, I'm afraid to ask a question. Yeah, you're laughing. Anyway, I go back to the San Francisco questions because of where our business is. Will it sounds like the two MLSs, Robert, will just mirror each other with all the fields. You know how when we list something in San Francisco, we go through our MLS to list, but it's sometimes a little bit different with their SF listing up there. So will they be the same?
I'm not certain. That's a great question. I don't believe we're going to be importing additional concession fields. So
Okay.
I know that the CRMLS concession fields will not come into our system. So I'm suspecting if San Francisco, who is it? Metrolist adds those, then we will not bring in anything that's been added. If they already have them, like in their terms or something like that, we'll just leave it alone and it'll just be a thing.
I think it's because sometimes when buyers agents are looking at a property listed in San Francisco, sometimes you see it a little differently on the two sites. And that's the question.
Well, so not to derail this, but you know, it's local. All real estate is local, and they should have local nuance and local flavors. It's not. It really shouldn't be homogenized to the point where it's all the same. And I think that's what CRMLS and CAR are looking for, this national or the statewide kind of system. But as soon as you have a statewide, it's going to immediately call for something more localized. So that's why the NorCal Alliance is working pretty well, because we're trying to give the most similar experience across multiple markets, but retaining the local nuances and subtleties which our systems have. In fact, to use San Francisco as an example, for them, they have tenancy as common as a property class, a subclass, or a subclass, and we have tenancy as common as an ownership type. So what we're doing, working even today, is to figure out, okay, maybe we should be adding tenancy in common as a subclass. In which case, then it'll be kind of like an apples to apples, and your marketing will fit our people better. And that, but we still retain everything else. So we're doing all of these things so that you can work across borders, you know, agents without borders kind of thing. But at the same time, we want to maintain the local markets, because whereas San Francisco is a little bit more uniform with the urban market. MLS Listings has community in the coast, community out in the rural area, and community in the San Francisco Valley or Silicon Valley, you know, excuse me, Santa Clara, Silicon Valley, Mountain View, that kind of thing. And they all have their, you know, subtleties and requirements. So that's why I think the NorCal Alliance is something to be supported, and we're working with San Francisco so that brokerages like yours can pop in and out, you know, and
okay. The other question, and I think it might also, we were on the car call the other day with the new forms, but if we have a listing right now and it is in San Francisco, the fields, will they automatically drop off for compensation, or do we have to go in and change those?
Well, you have to talk to San Francisco. I suspect they're going to drop them off. I can't think of any MLS that's going to require their agents to change them, because they may not, and now they're exposed. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Kelly?
Thank you. I wanted to address the question that Carl San Miguel was talking about with regard to lenders, how they view concessions. Obviously, I want to couch this with the fact that people need to talk to their lenders, but Carl's right. Years ago, it was always non-recurring, but not long ago, or actually a while ago, lenders changed that to include recurring and non-recurring when you are giving a credit towards closing costs. It can be recurring and non-recurring, but again, check with your lender. Now, on the NAR town halls, or excuse me, CAR town halls, they were pointing out that, you know, concessions are concessions and can be used for anything: closing costs, buyer agent commission. However, when you do a concession, the lender will limit the percentage based on the down payment in the loan program. So they might say, on $1 million home, you can't exceed 6% to go towards concessions or 3%. And if you have 2.5 going to an agent, that only leaves you 0.5% to go towards closing costs. So they're recommending that if you're going to give concessions, make sure you check with your lender what percentage of the purchase price you're allowed to give as a concession that the buyer can utilize however they want, as long as that percentage gets used up by true cost, a true compensation of the buyer's agent. But you're better off separating them out, they're saying, if you don't want to have it all lumped into a restriction of only 3% of the purchase price is allowed as a concession from the seller. What you do is you have the seller say, I agree to pay X compensation to the buyer's agent, and I agree to pay this amount towards concessions to go towards loan costs, which keeps that buyer's agent's commission or compensation from being included in that total percentage the lender will allow. So if you keep them separate from each other, you can give both, basically, and they won't be restricted so much. Like if they're only putting 5 or 10% down, they're only going to be allowed maybe 2% or 3% concession, which is not going to be enough to cover the agent compensations for their buyer's agent compensation. So separating it out. Hope that makes sense. The car town halls address this. So if you go into their website and access the recordings, they cover this, and talk to your lender to confirm based on your buyer's down payment, what is allowable to my buyer from the seller as a concession, no matter how they spend it. Okay. Make sense? I hope.
Yeah, good tip.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm gonna do a couple, Carol, if you have something on this, otherwise I'm gonna do a couple Zoom questions.
Why don't you go to the Zoom questions and then come back to me?
Okay. Will there be a clear guide on how and where to state concessions for new listings?
No, we're not going to provide, to my knowledge, Mark, back me up or correct me. We're not going to provide language or suggest language.
Okay. I assume that's a talk to your broker conversation.
Yeah, stay within the concessions requirements that we talked about here and do not step outside into offers of compensation.
Okay. If you have a current unsold listing when this transition takes place that showed compensation before, can the agent use the previous copy of the MLS printout to show that the seller agreed to the compensation prior to when it was removed so they can still use it?
You can show it all you want, but there will be no enforcement or contractual unilateral offer being made. So you have to codify that in your document, in your transaction. The MLS, there won't be any arbitration if they decide not to pay you.
Okay. Go ahead, Carl.
So I was going to touch on 3 things real quickly to Kelly's comment and clarify by looking at the new forms and going back, as Kelly mentioned, and review the recordings on the CR town halls. I believe the new the new purchase agreement has 2 separate lines, one for concession, if a buyer's offering or asking for concessions, and one for covering the for the seller to cover the buyer's agent's compensation. So it's separated, I believe, there, but verify with the recordings from CAR and also when you see the new contract. The other one, just to clarify for those that did know what Robert was referring to earlier, when he mentioned CRMLS, I believe, and again, this is one of the things I'm going to defer to Robert if I got it wrong. I believe CRMLS has opted to have a concession field. That's when Robert was talking about kind of local custom. I understand that's MLS listings the board decided not to do that, And most MLSs have decided not to do that, to be more on the conservative side. Again, we need to understand that DOJ is on top of this and is going to be monitoring the industry's implementation of the settlement guidelines, as well as some other things as well. So just to clarify, CRMLS is the California Regional MLS that covers most of Southern California. And there was one more thing I was going to touch on and I forgot. So I'll come back.
Yeah, and my comment was not to impugn our colleagues to the south. It was just that they were very visible in the early goings, and they came out strong, and now they might be you know, trying to change their tune a little bit because they might have gotten, you know, a lot of attention, and I don't think they really want a lot of
I remember
attention.
the last thing I was going to touch on. There was a comment in the chat, and I can't remember who posted it, to kind of clarify what we're talking about, because it is, I think a lot of people are getting confused between what can be referenced and disclosed, promoted, whatever, however you want to describe it, on the MLS, which is you cannot talk about what is being offered or willing to be offered to buyer's agents on the MLS. That is separate from when you have offers and off MLS communications between agents on behalf of their clients, negotiations of compensations and offer of compensations. That is allowed, just not on the MLS.
Yep, absolutely.
And there's a lot of questions that I didn't ask. Some of those is because those are buyer broker questions about, can you restrict how much you offer, or how many agreements can a buyer sign? And my suggestion to you is talk to your broker and ask your broker. My other suggestion is to listen to the town halls from CAR and NAR on this information. SCORE has done several classes on the buyer broker agreement that is new and updated. So you can take one of those. I know a lot of brokerages are also offering them. We're going to be teaching the accredited buyer class 2 more times, maybe 3 this year for free. Because of the NAR settlements, they're offering these classes for free. It goes over the buyer broker compensation, how to have these conversations with your clients, so that you can use the new language that's coming. And just literally launched this morning, Larry Spiteri is going to be with us next Monday. He's going to be teaching the new RPA contract, which apparently went from 8 to 17 pages. You will get a link to the RPA. It is on Zoom only. It will not be recorded. So if you sign up and you don't show up, thank you for your money. There will be no refunds if you don't show up, but we will be doing that next Monday. I'll put a link to that chat in the chat box if you want to sign up for that RPA class. Does anybody else have questions for Robert, for Carly, for Mark? Anything you want to put in the chat box because you don't want to ask? Raise your hand. You're all clear. This is amazing. 256 people today are ready to go on August 13th.
It's an awesome group. It's an awesome group. They're just really sharp professionals.
That's right.
Keeping the wheels of, commerce going in our market. That's great.
And Jody, as we talked about, way an hour ago, stay tuned. This is an evolving environment we're in.
And it is. And there was a question, and there was a kind of a question / comment made. I think there's going to be a lot more phone calls being made. So that means several things. You should actually have a voicemail. Don't just have it say, Jody Souza's unavailable. Please leave a message. Or you shouldn't say, this mailbox has not been set up yet. Because if you have an agent that's calling you, they want to hear, hi, this is Carl Lee, realtor with, I am unavailable to take your call right now. Please leave me a message. And then when you get that message, that means you're going to need to pick up the phone and make a phone call and dial. So now you're dialing for dollars. But in all honesty, I can't tell you how many people you get their voicemail and you're like, is this Carl Lee?
Yeah.
Who did I reach? You know, can't have it from the 80s where you have music playing and then you come on. And so I think this is a time to really step up your professionalism. That's what this is all about, is your professionalism. So set up your voicemail, tell them who you are, tell them what agency you're with. And when you get those voicemails, respond to each other, please. Because that's the only way you guys are going to get this done now. It's about being professional and calling people back.
Yep.
And I think the other thing is people don't like to be the one that calls it out, and you don't want to be the one that's, you know, tattletaling or anything like that. But if you see something that's blatant, don't assume that the MLS is going to catch it, because there's a lot. If you see something, I hate to say this, but if you see something, say something.
Yep.
That goes for an ethics violation. That goes for an MLS violation. This industry is under a huge microscope right now. So let's get ourselves out by not being those people.
Yeah, and I want to remind, thank you, Jody, and I want to remind, I mean, sorry for interrupting. I want to remind everybody that all your reports are anonymous. We go to great pains to ensure there's a huge firewall between the reporting agent and the responding agent. So you can confidently, so Carl can confidently report the other Carl, Carl with a K, Carl with a T.
Just for reference, Carl Lee is little Carl, and I'm big Carl.
Okay.
An eighth of an inch is an eighth of an inch.
We're gonna write that one down.
Yeah, that's right. Note to self.
So I'm going to put a link to the SCORE calendar. Check it out. There's a lot of information. Carl, do you have a?
Yeah, just a thought, and this is kind of what I've been working under. So I'm not deep in the details of all of these changes currently. I was involved previously, but because the changes are great, I've been taking classes multiple times. I've been to 2 of the CR hall meetings, town hall meetings, listen to the recordings. That would be my advice to everybody, because we got to not only understand the changes, but we need to have the mindset that we can articulate it in a way that helps our clients. So that's my advice, is everywhere, every place you can, get as much information as possible, even if it's a repeat.